Pues vamos a arrancar con el evento internacional del día de hoy. El día de hoy tenemos como invitado especial a Carol Ptak, que es la fundadora del Demand-Driven Institute. Y bueno, es toda una figura internacional en la parte de cadena de suministro, autora de varios libros del tema. Y pues va a acompañarnos con esta plática. La plática del día de hoy, ustedes vieron el nombre, Revolutionize, la parte del MRP Forum, y después hay que hacer esto más dinámico, ¿no? Toda la parte de lo que es el DDMRP, es un modelo de planeación, digamos, más moderno, que nos permite operar con un ambiente o un entorno complicado como el que vivimos hoy en día. Hoy día la parte de la cadena de suministro y el mundo pues enfrenta mucha variabilidad, tanto de la parte de demanda como de la parte de suministro. Entonces necesitamos un modelo de planeación que nos permita operar bajo ese entorno. I'm going to switch to English for the presentation of Carol.
Muchas gracias.
I think for today there is one question we want you to ask. Can DDMRP or DDMRP truly revolutionize supply chain management, or the traditional MRP system still tried and true method for the most industry? Do you think the MRP, I think we have given the MRP several chances to fix our problems, and MRP hasn't been able to do that. So what Carol is going to talk about is how the MRP can fix those problems, and how the companies have been improving their performance using this DDMRP method. So Carol, nice to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. An applause, please.
I had to check in my passport. Last time I was here was 4 years ago. Hard to believe. Yes, so I have to start with my lo siento mucho, hablo inglés solamente. But I appreciate being in Mexico because I really admire all of you for your ability to speak both languages. I want to start my presentation with something that somebody's not expecting. I don't often get to do this in person because I have not been on the road for 4 years. Ricardo Ramirez, get up here. You're in trouble now. Ricardo is our newest master instructor for the Demand-Driven Planner program. He's our youngest. He had no idea I was going to do that to him. Now, if I was really mean, I would hand him the clicker and say, go ahead. All right. So I appreciate him and all the instructors that we've had around the world. The pandemic changed all of our lives. It was really surprising for me. I was in Bogota when things really started to shut down quickly. And in a week that I was in Bogota, I saw the American dollar to the Colombian peso, and I saw the peso devalue by 50% in 4 days. Yeah, wow. I was in the Bogota airport on the international side, and Juan was in the Bogota airport on the domestic side, and we were chatting, and I had an 11:45 p.m. flight that night. I got on my flight, went to Houston, got off my flight in Houston, and I looked over at international arrivals, and there was nobody there. And I said to somebody, I said, what happened? ¿Qué pasa? And they're like, well, didn't you hear it? At midnight, Colombia closed her borders. Nobody in, nobody out. I could feel the whoop. I just barely got out by 15 minutes. Had I not been on that flight, I would have been in Colombia for 7 weeks. And I told Juan, I said, you would have taken me to the finca, and we would have been there. We would have gotten a lot of work done. But it just goes to show how quick our world around us changes. So let's start with, what is our conventional planning suite? These concepts were conceived in the 1950s. Yes, before many of you in this room were born. They were Commercialized? No, he wasn't even around then. I was, he was not.
Not even me was.
So it was conceived in the 50s. We really started to commercialize it in the 60s and the 70s because a gentleman named Joe Orlicki wrote the book. By the 1980s, we had this diagram that you see on the left. This is the conventional planning suite, as Gustavo said, that we've been using since the 50s and 60s. So what does it look like? Well, what we do is we make a forecast, which we all know is 100% accurate, never changes, we never have a problem. So we tie that forecast, it's just like church. All the good seats are up front. So we tie that forecast directly to our order in planning, because then what we do is we take this forecast and we calculate our projected available balance. And when we go through the projected available balance and we're now at below zero or safety stock, we plan an order receipt and we back up and we plan our order release. And this whole thing focuses on the fact that now for the first time, we can synchronize what I need to order and when. The whole power of conventional planning is that when computers were invented, we could say, what do I need? What have I got? What do I have to go get and when? And everything was dependent. Why? Because all of our conventional planning systems came out of project management. The guys that started all this, George Plazel, Ollie White, Dick Ling, Joe Orlicki, during World War II, they were in the shipbuilding business in the United States. So they were familiar with project management. So they said, why can't we use this new thing called a computer to plan a smaller project called a work order? But here's the problem. Do you plan material in a work order to be available at time of order release early? You have more than that on your cell phone today. So the simplifying assumption was, based on the technology that we had, the only way they knew what order to place and when is they pushed everything on the critical path. So what do we know in project management? Anything that delays us on the critical path extends the project, right? Now, by definition, in MRP, we have now put everything on the critical path. So a delay anywhere is a delay everywhere. And the whole then thing that we added were all these what we call the black box optimizers. 1984, a gentleman named Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, an Israeli physicist, wrote the book The Goal and introduced us to the concept of the theory of constraints. That I have to maximize my output per unit of constrained capacity. And we need to optimize that bottleneck. Software companies said, optimize one bottleneck? Easy. We'll optimize 99 bottlenecks. We'll optimize 1,000 bottlenecks. We're going to optimize the entire supply chain. Why? Well, because we want to keep all of our resources busy all of the time. Because if we can do that, then our companies will be better off. Well, and those became black boxes. And in fact, Dr. Goldratt's original software was named Disaster. And it was, because nobody can understand the mathematics that's underneath the optimizers. Then we have the whole idea of, we've been chasing for years, the emphasis on forecast accuracy. If only I could improve my forecast accuracy, then my planning system would work better. And so let's really make it more sophisticated. And now we're going to run what's called MEIO, multi-echelon inventory optimization, because what do we know? To have better customer service, I have to have more inventory. And that our customer service is directly tied to the level of inventory that we have. And what we need to do is calculate safety stock based on our desired level of customer service. Okay. And so we emphasize cost optimization. How can I try to minimize my cost across my Object looks good, right? And then we don't have any mention of flow in any of the sales presentations. And I criticize myself. I was a vice president and global industry executive for PeopleSoft, who is the second largest software company on the face of the planet. So I know how the software presentations were put together. So what's the problem? This is where we've been. Well, here's the problem. When I'm so focused on forecast, what ends up happening is that I'm taking something that inherently I know is bad, because what are the 3 rules of forecast? Forecasts are always wrong. The further out in the future, the more wrong. The more detail, the more wrong. And what do I have to plan by? Part number. Out how long? My total cumulative lead time, which for some companies could be over a year. Aerospace industry, cumulative. Everything dependent to it changes. When I was at PeopleSoft, we were so committed. We were the real-time people. And we brought out the very first real-time MRP system. We expected the accolades and the cheers from our customers. You know what our customers said when we brought out real-time MRP? Make it stop. Just make it stop. Because at 8 o'clock the planner was okay, and at 9:30 they weren't, and by 10 o'clock it was a disaster, and by 11 o'clock maybe they were okay. Then they had this other whole batch of parts that they had to look at, and they couldn't handle the system nervousness. Because every time somebody changed something in the bill of materials, it would blow through to the left. been very, very smart and put together the right resources to help him manage that cash and successfully grow exponentially. So I would submit to you that if you protect and promote flow, you're going to maximize return on investment. And what is the goal? And I get the same response wherever I go in the world. Make money. Not what Goldratt said. And I know, because I wrote Necessary but Not Sufficient with Dr. Goldratt. He said, make money now and into the future. How do you measure that? Not profit. Because if I said to you, I made $1 million last year, did I do good? Depends, right? There's the consultant's answer. It depends. What does it depend on? Well, if I invested $5 billion in assets to make that $1 million, I did very poorly. But if I invested $1,000 in assets to make that $1 million, I did very, very well. So what's really the metric we're after to drive? Return on investment. How much return did I get for the investment that I made? It is not about profit, it's about ROI. So let's explain flow. If flow is so critical, then I have to improve it. Well, to improve it, I have to be able to define it. So what is flow? Flow is the rate at which my supply chain converts material to something somebody wants to buy. It's that simple. If it's still here, it's not flow, that's inventory. And it goes into your investment. So what is this cash velocity? Cash velocity is where I take my revenue minus my variable cost minus my period operating cost. And that's how much cash I get left in my pocket. Pretty simple. Well, as I improve that cash velocity, by definition, I'm improving my net profit divided by investment, which is and always has been ROI. So, how do I quantify flow? I mentioned this a little bit ago, Little's Law. If I look at my throughput per time period times my lead time, that gives me my work in process. Or, if I take my work in process divided by my lead time, that gives me my throughput rate. Or, my WIP divided by my throughput is my lead time. They're related. The longer it takes, and I worked with an American colonel, and he said, the longer a cow stands in the field, the more grass it eats. He's right. I'm also a cattle rancher. I live on a cattle ranch in Arizona. The longer the cow stands in the field, the more grass it eats. What does that mean? It means that the longer your product is in process, what's going to happen? The more cost it's going to incur. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and they were complaining about how they make to order, big, very, very high variety, low volume each. And they said, and our customers are constantly changing their mind. So how do you solve that problem? Shorten the lead time, so that the number of changes you can get it goes way down if you can be more agile. So we know how to do that. So how do I measure that flow? The company vital signs. When you go to the doctor, what do? They take your temperature, they take your blood pressure, they listen to your pulse. If any one of those is out of whack, you might end up going to the hospital immediately. So what does that mean for a company? Well, for a company, it's about our working capital, it's our customer base, and our contribution margin. They're all connected. What we want is we want all of those to be running well. Because when I pull one out of alignment, it affects the other two. So, cost. Am I saying cost isn't important? No. As I improve flow, my costs are reduced. Why? Because I've eliminated all the non-value added activity in my supply chains. Like if I'm in distribution, cross shipping. Cross shipping is a horrible waste. You want to ship from production out to the forward location, and you don't want the forward location shipping to each other. What happens when I try to be efficient in manufacturing? And I have those batch sizes that I figured out because of EOQ. And I've got these big long batch sizes, and I start that efficient batch, and then an important customer comes along. And what do? I shut that down, I build what the customer wants, and then I go back to that efficient batch. And then another customer comes along, and then I shut down that efficient batch, I build what the customer needs. And what was interesting is one of the earliest adopters of demand-driven, we told them to reduce their batch sizes, because they based their batch sizes based on economic order quantity. They said, oh, we can't. Because if we set up more frequently, our cost will go up. Really? When they reduced the batch size, then they didn't have to keep interrupting these long runs. So what they found out when they cut their batch sizes in half, the number of hours they were spending in setup actually went down. And they went, we didn't see that coming. So flow is a really common objective across lots of disciplines. Here's the guys that we can all either love or hate. Joe Ehrlich, Ollie Wright, George Plaza. Never heard George speak that George didn't say all benefits are directly related to the speed of flow. He called it the first law of manufacturing. We call it Plaza's law. Taiichi Ono, lean. Everywhere in the world, when I say, what's the objective of lean, what answer do I get? This one, reduce waste. Ono never said it. Ono wrote about what he called his river production system. Dr. Goldratt, TOC, his whole idea was, how do I improve my system throughput by understanding where's my constraint? And finally, got to stick another American up there, W. Edwards Deming went to Japan after World War II to help rebuild Japan. He understood the importance and the criticality of variability. All of these are dependent on flow. We lived through a period, and I'd say about the early 70s, well into the 80s, where I called it the war of ore. Because you had Dick Ling writing the book on sales and operations planning. You had Goldratt writing the book on TOC called The Goal. We had Deming out there writing Out of the Crisis. So there was something going on in the marketplace in the early 80s when all these books are written, because we're recognizing what we had is not working. And the conversation was, is either you did lean or you did MRP. You did theory of all benefits are directly related to the speed of flow of materials and information. So if flow is so important, then why don't we just all do that? Well, we must have some problems. Enter the real world. Is there anybody in here that's not affected by volatility? Variability. The world's changing around us. Uncertainty. Do we even know what's going to happen? Like I said, when I went to Bogota, who knew? 3 days later, they looked at me when I got off the plane. They said, we're really surprised you came. And I said, why wouldn't I come? I was actually worried about getting back into the US. That was my worry when I got on the plane. And so my plan B was Gustavo's house. He said, just come here. He said, I know some good coyotes that can get you across the border. All right, complex. When we name supply chains, and I say we because I was part of that, we looked at operations. Operations is linear. We have a line of operations. And there's a constraint, and it's very understandable. And we said, if I connect operations to my customer, and I connect it to my supplier, and then I connect it to my customer's customer, and my supplier's supplier, we have something called a supply chain. Here's the problem. Supply chains are not chains. Never have been. Supply chains are what are called complex adaptive systems. They are a series of nodes and connections, and as soon as you cut them apart, trying to understand the pieces, you've now lost the context of the whole. So, by definition, a complex adaptive system cannot be optimized. Anytime I put pressure on a complex adaptive system, it changes and morphs. All right, so I can never optimize it. That's why there is not a single APS success story in the world. Now, what do I mean by that? Is there APS running all over? Absolutely. Is it driving improved return on investment for the company? And the answer is no. I've never found one. And it's because we're trying to optimize something that can mathematically not be optimized, because it's a complex adaptive system. It's an entirely different approach. That's what supply chains look like. Always have. The only thing that's happened is they've gotten more complex. They've had more connections, because as nations like the United States, the UK, and France have de-industrialized and started to outsource manufacturing to places like Mexico, China, right? Those nodes become longer. And how do we manage that? And then where are we even at today? That picture up there could be New York, could be Paris, we don't know. We are drowning in data and starving for information. So VUCA is our new normal. During the pandemic, we got lots of calls from executives to say, we're going to put our demand-driven implementation on hold until things return to normal. And I said, guess what? This is your new normal. Welcome to your new world. Because basically a company has two choices. We either learn how to adapt or we die. So, and we can see how fast things can happen, right? Have we ever had that happen in work? Where all of a sudden, you know, like during the pandemic, there was a company in France, they make alcohol. Their projection was, as France closed down, what did they do? They were going to lay all their people off. Guess what happens when you lock people up? Consumption of alcohol went skyrocketing high, but it was different sizes, different kinds of alcohol. And what they ended up having to do is, what they had to do was, their forecast accuracy went from 65% to 6%. But their revenue during that period increased by 28% because they were able to adapt what they were actually packaging to the actual demand. Okay, something's fundamentally broken. We've got all the sophisticated computers and optimizers and machine learning and artificial intelligence and all this crazy stuff going on today. But we've got 2 points of inventory. The first one is we have too little of some parts. Would you agree? We got shortages. Anybody in here have 100% on time in full? That's what I thought. How about this one? Have we got too much? You got excess and obsolete. Hey, I got hands for that one, right? All right. I get on airplanes, and my mom now is 94 years old, bless her heart. Every time I fly, I tell mom I'm leaving, and my mother looks at me, and I get the same question. Why do you have to go? You have instructors, like Ricardo, all over the world. And I said, Mom, you don't understand. What I do is I travel, I see really, really smart people, and I tell them really profound things in a very funny accent. And my mother looks at me, she says, but you don't have an accent. Mom, when I'm in Monterrey with 100 of my closest Mexican friends, I'm the one with the accent. So here you go. If too little is a bad thing, and too much is a bad thing, then somewhere between too little and too much is just right. Make sense? But what happens today using traditional planning, by definition, I got too much of the wrong stuff, I got too little of the right stuff, and overall I got too much stuff. Would you agree? And what happens is every time I run MRP planning, I oscillate from too little to too much and too much to too little. And your planners, when they plan, are saying, yeah, that doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to put that in my file cabinet, and I'm going to run MRP again and see if it's still there tomorrow. Because they're not stupid. Because somebody's going to come along and question. When we did a survey in the early parts of Demand Driven, we had over 90% of the companies that have reported the issue. In my travels around the world, conversations with executives, 100% of the executives, they go, how did you know? Because they believe supply chain professionals are either crazy or stupid. Because they go, how is it we bought you millions of dollars of software, right? We've got all this education, we've got all this training into you, and you still have too much inventory and you got shortages. You got to either be crazy or stupid. And that's their only conclusion. So, what's the bottom line effect? We're doing this oscillation. Little Johnny's not happy. We end up with chronic shortages, constantly. At the same time, I got excess inventory. Because my old boss used to look at me and say, you got $3 million of inventory, ship something. But the customer didn't order what we had in inventory. You know? And actually, I worked for a boss that said, then make it up. You can't just ship customers stuff they didn't order. He said, don't worry about it. You're not responsible for returns. I made it through one quarter working for that company, and I was out of there. It's like, that's not ethical. And then what do? We try. As supply chain professionals, we're trying. We're working late hours. Our families are mad. You know, we're missing our kids' events, and we're trying to do anything we can do to expedite. But our real problem's at a higher level. It's this guy. It's the bullwhip effect. What happens? Small changes upstream cause big changes downstream. Except the bullwhip effect is bidirectional. Small changes from the supply side cause big changes for the customer. So we've got this bidirectional bullwhip that we've got to deal with. And the more connections we put, the worse the effect. We all know this. And what do we say about supply chains? More nodes, more connections, more global, longer lead times, more stuff can happen. Coming down here, I flew from Phoenix. Praise the Lord. American has now restored the direct flight between Phoenix and Monterrey. I'm so happy. But the aircraft that I was supposed to be on last night was coming in from Santa Barbara. And I'm watching the status starting at about noon. And I go, uh-oh, this thing's got a mechanical delay. Because you know how mechanical delays. You're late, you're on time, you're late, you're later, you're later. Nope, you're on time, and I'm watching this thing. Long story short, the flight finally did take off, 3.5 hours late for a 2-hour flight, and then I got to enjoy the thunderstorm last night from a whole different perspective. Okay, really big thunderstorm, tiny little plane. All right, there we came into Monterrey last night. So I got here about almost 4 hours late. But what I knew was, sitting in that Phoenix airport, if that flight leaves tonight, I'm getting to Monterrey. Why? Traffic system? Really? Had I picked the connection flight yesterday and gone through Dallas to get here, I would not have gotten here because the flights to Dallas were canceled. Okay? It's a direct flight, right? The more connections, the more variability that we have. So how do we deal with this in supply chain? Here's the dynamic part of supply chains. So what makes a planning suite demand-driven? Well, the forecast ranges tie directly to our operational capability, not through a master production schedule, but through master settings. And what's the latest shiny object that people are chasing right now? Machine learning, artificial intelligence. Oh God, oh, but that looks so good. The computer can give us all this information. And it can, assuming that you have a model to start with. So, a demand-driven planning suite establishes an operating model that provides a range of capability that we then can compare to our forecast range. Because anybody that's ever done any forecasting, a good forecast has got 3 numbers. Are most likely, if everything goes right, and if everything screws up. Optimistic, pessimistic, most likely. But what happens in the traditional planning suite, I got to come up with a single number, and I drive all my planning to that single number. No. We need to be able to tie our forecast range to our capability range in operations. We need to create strategically placed independence. Those are decoupling points. It's where I can absorb variability coming at that point from both directions. It determines my customer lead time, and it determines my inventory investment. And I do this through my bill of materials, through my distribution network. That I have a completely transparent methodology. The mathematics is 5th grade. And are you smarter than a 5th grader? Right? It's something that's got to be simple, that a planner can validate, not a black box that you have to have 17 PhDs to be able to figure it out. And that we have to be responsive to actual customer demand. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a company where a customer order will come in, and the answer will be tell the customer they cannot have it because it is not in the master schedule for this month. Do you have the components? Yep, we do. but it's not in the NPS. And one of our critical metrics is our adherence to the NPS. And I look at them and I go, do you hear yourself? You have an actual customer order, they want to pay you, you have the materials, you've got the capacity, and because you're measured by the NPS, you're not going to build it? And they go, yep, that's how I'm measured. Smart. And we need a process, this innovation needs to be dynamic, and we need to emphasize flow. We need to protect and promote flow, because what we know is that drives cash velocity. As I drive cash velocity, I'm driving net profit divided by investment, which is ROI. So, how do you sleep with a camel? You let its nose under the tent, right? So what's the nose? It's DDMRP. I love it when people come up to me and say, well, DDMRP doesn't do this, and DDMRP doesn't do this, and DDMRP is just the starting point. It's the first step to becoming a demand-driven adaptive enterprise. 6 steps. First is, where do we strategically decouple so that I can absorb variability from both directions, that I can use this as my primary position for planning, that it determines my customer lead time and my inventory investment. Then, how big of a buffer do I have to put there? What is that dependent on? It's dependent on lead time, it's dependent on my average daily usage, it depends on my variability, but I need it to dynamically adjust. It needs to keep adjusting as we're going through. I was in one company and their software company said, don't adjust your buffers but once a month. What a disaster. Because instead of it adjusting smoothly over time, it would hold here, and then a month later, whack, boom, they ran into a wall. And they said, we can't afford to adjust our buffers more frequently, because every time we adjust our buffers, it's a huge adjustment. I said, because you're doing it once a month. I said, you got to do it over time. And they thought about it, and I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. Then, our pull, how do we operate? Our demand-driven planning and our execution, and then how do we analyze and adapt? That's why we wrote this book. We actually wrote Warlicky's 3rd edition. We thought we were done. Then we wrote DDMRP and we thought we were done. Little did we know, we would write 5 more books after that book. And all it is it's a starting point. DDMRP, my other favorite is people come up and they say, I don't believe in DDMRP. Not a religion. Okay, it's something that you don't believe in or not, it's a methodology. So we had to do some things to make all this stuff work together. To move from what I call the war of or to the land of and. It's lean and MRP and TFC and Six Sigma. So what are the innovations that make that all work together? Because understand, it's all about flow. So the first thing we had to do is, okay, let's decouple. MRP only understands 2 forms of lead time. Purchasing lead time, or a manufacturing lead time, assumes that everything is available. It also understands cumulative lead time, which is how far out our NPS has got it. Right? Those are the only 2 kinds they get. DDMRP says, yeah, hold it, back up. Let's put in some decoupling points, so that basically, in effect, what we've done is we've now taken and put slack time back into our planning. So we've really gone back to our roots. So let's put some decoupling positions in. And we didn't invent decoupling. It was in the Apex Dictionary, now ASCM, for years. And look at the definition. Selection of... Why? Because it determines our customer lead time and our inventory investment. So what does that mean is that it creates these shorter, independently planned lead times. So now, instead of having to plan this whole mess together, because it's dependent, now I've got these shorter segments that I can plan at the same time. So by definition, it gives me a much shorter response time to the market. And what can we do with agility? We achieve stability with agility because our response times go way down. And in some cases, average is about 60 or 70% reduction in lead time. I've seen over 90% in aerospace companies. So we use this decoupled lead time. This we did have to invent to do what? Figure out where is it that we're going to place these magical little decoupling buffers? Then we have to determine the realistic lead time. Are we within our customer's willingness to wait? How do I properly size these buffers? Because every time I add a buffer position, it affects every other buffer position in the network. And then how do I find these high value inventory leverage targets? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome AI. You want to use AI? There's a great place for it. Crawl through the bills of materials in your distribution network and come back with where's the best place right now. But what happens is as soon as you place those decoupling points, you've now stabilized the variability in your network, which now has changed your network. So that means that what are you going to have to do? Shift where those decoupling points are. This is not a set it and forget it. This is not static data. The positioning and the sizing is a very dynamic process. So, every company, we got lots of different parts with lots of different bills of materials. And a lot of these parts share parts, components. So we're looking for that leverage point. Because what did Archimedes say? If I can find a leverage point, and I can find a lever long enough, I can move the world. And this is how you move a supply chain, by finding the correct leverage point. And here's the beauty of it. You don't even have to find the correct leverage point, just close enough. That's the nice part. It's demand-driven. DDMRP is kind of like horseshoes and hand grenades. Close enough is good enough. You can do it mostly wrong and still do pretty well. And so we use decoupled lead time to find these decoupling points. The planning equation. How do we plan these decoupling points? We've had this idea of decoupling points for a long time. A lot of people call it postponement. I'm going to build the stock, and then I'll assemble to order. Great. How do I plan that point? Oh, this has been the problem with TOC. TOC did not have a way to plan that buffer. So, what does every planner want to talk about? What's coming? What do I got? Where did MRP start? What have I got? What do I need? What do I got to go get? And when? But the first question is where? Where am I going to place these decoupling points? And then I look and say, what demand do I need to fulfill immediately? And what future demand is relevant? Then use this daily application of this net flow equation. Simple. What do I have? Plus what's coming to me. I don't care the date. It's just coming. Minus what my qualified demand is. Qualified demand is what do I got to ship today? Do I have anything that's past due? And do I have visibility of any orders coming out through that decoupled lead time that qualify as a spike? Single order, multiple orders within that lead time that's going to collapse my buffer. Simple. I look where I'm at in my buffer. If I'm below top of yellow, I order back up to top of green. Here's what blows your mind. There's no future calculation of planned requirements. I thought Oracle's brain was going to blow up when we told them that. They're like, well, you have to do your projected available balance, you got to plan the receipt, you got to back schedule the planned release. We're like, We run this equation, companies that are mature in their use, run this in real time because it gives you most relevant information. So I can't back schedule because what's one of the problems I have with traditional MRP? I back schedule and what do? I run out of time, especially when I broke safety stock. Now I've got an order that's past due for release and expedite. To do what? Replace safety stock, which is basically what? Dead inventory. Oh, that makes sense. Let's invest a lot of money to expedite this thing in here. Instead, now we have a planning equation that replenishes the buffer only to actually what's consumed. What's better demand signal? A forecast or customer order? They're not always perfect, but it's a whole lot better. So, what's qualified demand? I look at actual sales orders. Do I have anything that's past due? And here's the key. If I maintain the integrity of my buffers, I maintain the integrity of my operating model. So if I maintain the integrity of my buffers, what's my customer service level? Number one question we get. How do I tie my buffer size to customer service level? If the key is maintaining the integrity of your buffers, what's your customer service level? The 100%. Okay. I mean, what happened to the Titanic? How did she go from buffers to Titanic? What's a bulkhead in a ship? The buffer. What happened to the Titanic? The bulkheads didn't go to the next floor up. So the water went over the bulkheads, sunk the ship. You've got to maintain the integrity of your bulkheads. When you maintain the integrity of your bulkheads, then maintain the integrity of your ship. And your ship doesn't sink. So I look at what I got today, past due, qualified supply. Notice 4 orders, but the total quantity doesn't click through our threshold. Okay. Net flow equation, pretty simple. I got 105 on hand, I got 240 on order. I don't care, it's probably 2 orders. I don't care what the dates are. My qualified demand is 20. My net flow position is 325. I'm below top of yellow. What am I going to do? Order up to top of green. When's the order due? I can't back schedule because I just calculated this today. What's the only direction I can go? Forward. Guess what? Full lead time. And what's involved with that full lead time? That decoupled lead time represents all the dependent times that are between the decoupling points. So I'm going to plan all those dependent events dependently like I always have. Don't throw out MRP. We're going to use MRP. So DDMRP for the first time makes all the assumptions for MRP planning valid. I have enough time. Demand doesn't change. So then what do I got to do? I released an order. Great. Now what happens? We explode. So this is traditional MRP. I blow it, and it blows all the way down and ripples down to the raw material. Different when we get to DDMRP, because what happens? I need an end item. I got an order for it. It explodes. Hits that stock position, and what does it do? Stops. No matter what. All right, so that's how I got that short response time, because now I have these intermediate stock positions. I only restart the explosion when the buffer needs it. So if the net flow position in the dependent buffer is below top of yellow, then it'll explode. So decoupled explosion literally means independent dependence. So this is why we called it DDMRP. We actually called it actively synchronized replenishment when we started, because you see my background's in IBM, and you let an IBMer name sushi, we would have named it dead wet fish, because we're very literal in how we name things. But thankfully we didn't name sushi, and thankfully we got asked to write Orlicky's 3rd edition, and that's the point at which it became DDMRP. Because there's similarities. Inside that box of dependencies, same thing. Except now, we have enough time. Why? Because that decoupled lead time is the longest time between decoupled positions. So when I schedule my order forward, now I can schedule all my dependent events within that lead time, and I now have enough time because I've honored the full lead time to my supplier. So what's the difference? Well, let's look at execution. How would you like this? Today's May 12th. Which order do I do first? I don't know. I got 2. Pick one. Flip a coin. Right? Then I'll do this one, then I'll do that one, right? Great. Has anything ever changed in your company from when you release the order to when you receive the order? That demand is higher or lower? You've had material scrap? You've had an adjustment? Look what happens here. This manufacturing order, its on-hand status is dark in the red at 12%. I don't care that it's not due until the 14th of May. That buffer's in the biggest need. So if I prioritize by color first, percentage second, I always maintain the integrity of my buffers. If I maintain the integrity of my buffers, I maintain the integrity of my operating model, which means what? My customer service is at 100%. So relative priority means you got this idea of where does it sit with respect to everything else? Because today when your planners try to plan, which part do they do first? I used to teach my planners, do an ATP violation first. Because somewhere in there, there's a customer order. Okay? We don't know. Which part do you do first? You do it by product family, you do it by SKU, what? Now we know, when we plan, I got to plan that part first. So the big thing is what DDMRP allows us to do is says goodbye to bimodal. I get rid of the too much, too little. and oscillating between the two. And what allows us to do more importantly, that instead of transaction control, you like that little smile, huh? Here's the most critical part. What's that? That's a run chart, right? What is a run chart? Process control. When I can shift from transaction control to process control, now I can tie the range that I have for my strategic planning to my operational capability. Ooh, now that's cool. Because why? I'm only replenishing the buffers as they're being consumed, so I'm more responsive to customer demand. So it's proven. All right, so what's the big difference between MRP and DRP? MRP, no decoupling. Everything is dependent by definition. DDMRP, we strategically select decoupling points based on 6 criteria. MRP was never designed to manage inventory. It came out of project management. Right? When is MRP happy? It's in its happy state when the projected available balance is what? 0. What's the other 0? Safety stock. So MRP is happy when its projected available balance is equal to safety stock. So what does that represent to you? Dead inventory that you're never planning on using, because if you do, heaven forbid, MRP will launch an order and expedite it. DDMRP says, let's strategically manage these stock positions. So instead of having an MPS that says, I don't care what the customer takes, you're going to build this. What if the customer doesn't take it? Keep building it? That makes sense to you? That's how you end up with excess and obsolete. Most ERP systems are what are called set it and forget it. Static. Matter of fact, when we do the implementation, we talk about static data. Lead time, safety stocks, order things. I got an opportunity to go with Gustavo. He doesn't ever want to take me to a customer. And this customer was working really hard on resetting all of its safety stock levels. And I looked at him and I said, you're wasting your time. You're going to be my age before you get through.
130,000 SKUs.
Yeah. It's like, dude, you're going to be my age. And he sort of looked at me, because he was 20-something. He's looking at me and goes, yes, I'm that old. So buffers change how often? Daily. Daily. They're adapting as the market is changing around us. MRP is going to try to keep safety stock. DDMRP says, you know what? What's the safety there for? There's safety embedded in the buffer, and what's it there for? To be used. If you don't use it, you adjust it down. Okay? There's the key. And MRP are forecasted demand signal, because if the forecast changes by 1 unit, it re-explodes all the dependency. DDMRP, it's a range. So we've got a range of capability. MRP gives us priority by due date, which is basically another forecast. DDMRP gives us priority by buffer status. This is a chart that was done by Camelot in Germany in conjunction with FAPIX, which is the French association. So pick your industry. What's the average? Average. Service level, improvement of on-time in full, median was 13%, max was about 54%. Lead time reduction, median about 22% down. I've seen greater than 90% in aerospace especially. Inventory reduction, 1/3 to 1/2. Yes, better customer service with less inventory, because it's all about flow. So DDMRP is a huge change from convention. What does it require? Education. It's not about software. It is not about software. It's about what we call thoughtware. It's about what runs up here. You've got to shift your brain to thinking about flow. It does require software. Now, a lot of companies start with Excel. But when we started back in 2007, when we wrote our first paper on this, there was exactly one software company that kind of sort of did this. Notice some big names up there? If they've invested, what does that mean to you? They know that the traditional approach is fundamentally broken. So they've invested in building that out in their software. There's a lot of opportunities with plugins and as well as ERP systems. But back to the camel. DDMRP is just the start. I love when people say, well, DDMRP doesn't do this. Well, no, it doesn't. DDMRP is not a tactical planning tool. It is a modeling and operational planning and execution tool. This is why, and we've got some of these here. Are they in Espanol? The books. Spanish? Yes. Okay, the DDMRP book's in English. But this is translated. We translated that book first to Spanish. Gustavo actually did the validation of the book. We wrote this for the execs to say, here's what the picture looks like, guys. You're on a journey. You need to be that little plant. Because how is it that a company survives today? We have to sense changes in the marketplace. We have to adapt our planning and production. We have to be resilient. During the pandemic, everybody wrote about resiliency. Great idea. There wasn't a single article that was written that said, and here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. And then how do you connect it? Because if you notice the first name up there, Dick Ling. Who's Dick Ling? He's the guy that invented sales and operations planning in 1984. Yes, he's still around. Yes, he's very healthy. And we've been working with him for the last 10 years because we realized when we wrote the DDMRP book, we weren't done. We had to tie it to sales and operations planning. So that book, that's it. So it's starting at stage one, recognizing that your company right now is trapped, and it's trapped in oscillating back and forth between cost and flow. We need to move from that to stage two, proof of concept. Please don't believe me that it'll work for your company. I wrote the book. I always love people. I say, you've never heard me say trust me. Don't trust me. Read the book, apply it to proof of concept, see if it'll work for you. Now I happen to know it will. Because unless you're living in a world with no variability, no uncertainty, no complexity, no ambiguity, demand-driven is going to work for you. Then you get to the full demand-driven operating model. This is where you connect it to sales and operations planning. And this is where it gets to be really fun. Because this is where you start to look at your competitors and say, who am I going to take out of the picture? Okay, because now you're using your operational capability for competitive success. All right. I think I did good on time-wise. Questions? Preguntas?
In a company, well, by steps, we heard that we have to move specific things to the couple areas and then to the last areas. We have to produce using less, not the big quantities and going to small quantities. And we have to imagine that the cost is not a driven for this. Do you think we can go on by steps and not doing these big changes?
Absolutely, and I'd really recommend. Step one, does your company have safety stock? Do you use safety stock?
Yes.
Ah, beautiful. What you do is you take all the items that have safety stock on them, or take a subset of the items that have safety stock on them, recalculate them as buffers, because you've already committed to holding inventory, right? Don't do any analysis. Just take the items that currently have safety stock, recalculate them as buffers, plan them with the net flow equation. Your inventory will go down by about 15 to 20%. Your on time and full goes up. Why? Because you stabilize your system. That's it. Little baby step. And go, hey, you know what? That was pretty cool. All right? And now let's take care of the rest of the items that have safety stock. Then go into, usually what happens if you have raw materials, usually that's where your safety stock is. Then do your raw materials first. Why? Easy, no bills of materials. Do you have distribution? Okay, go there. Go to, pick a distribution center and plan your DC, your furthest out DC using net flow equation. And then start to work this way. Leave manufacturing till the end. Leave those guys on the plant floor alone. Because what happens is when you take where you currently have safety stock and make it into a buffer, now you've eliminated that craziness of, uh-oh, I just broke safety stock, I got an order that's past due for release and I need to expedite. So I've taken that craziness out. So that means I've stabilized. If I go to distribution, now what I've taken out is DRP. Because what happens is the more echelons I have in my distribution network, the lumpier my demand gets to manufacturing. So manufacturing, even though the guys out in distribution might be selling 10 a day, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Guys in manufacturing seeing 1,000, nothing. 10,000, nothing. 2,000, and it's because of the lumpiness that comes down from distribution. So that would be my suggestion. Take a subset of your items that have safety stock, make them buffers, learn how to use the planning, go to distribution, stabilize distribution, because what's going to happen is that your production area is going to get a better demand signal, and they're going to love it, and it'll shorten your lead times. Because what typically happens is when you do that, lead times in manufacturing compress, so you don't need as many decoupling points in manufacturing. It's a step-by-step process. Yes, sir?
In companies that have a long vertical integration, is it preferable to start demand-driven on one of the sites, or one product line that affects all of the sites that are integrated to that supply?
My preference is started a single site. What Michelin did is they started, this is the difference when you talk to an executive audience versus operations. To operations, I say pick a small pilot. All right, take your items that have safety stock, start there. Great. When you talk to an executive audience, we were at Michelin, their idea of a small pilot is let's take the plant in Spain. And we'll start there. And then when they saw that it worked, then they've been going through plant by plant by plants, then both plants benefit. Because the consuming plant is going to get better service and the producing plant is going to get a better demand signal. So then you get a benefit again. And the big thing for Michelin is for the first time they moved their tactical planning from Clermont-Ferrand, which is corporate, out to the plant level. So the plant now does its own tactical planning. Corporate does the strategic planning. Question in the back. Gustavo, all the way back to the left.
Hi. We already are running something like the model that you talked about, and I have a question about how can you deal with the that is not set in a place. But you have a storage capacity limited, so you cannot let the buffer
Go over. Yeah.
go flow free.
Yeah, and that's something that was developed actually at Unilever, and it's called prioritize share. So if you've got anything that's any kind of capacitation, whether it be a truck, a vat, storage capacity, and I have to plan up to that level, it's a part of the planning process. It's called prioritize share. And we go through that in detail in the demand-driven planner class. So it allows me, which is very difficult to do under MRP, is it plans a group of parts together. Because if I've got certain storage capacity, then I need to plan a group of parts together, and it's not going to be exactly up to top of green. I'm going to spread it, and that's either if I have too much or too little. Do I have enough capacity? Do I have too much capacity? Have I got too little? And so operationally, that's how I do my planning. You also need to have what we call DDS and OP. We did not just put DD in front of everything. It is a separate tactical sales and operations planning. Because when you look at complex adaptive systems, there are always two loops that come together. This is a tactical adaptation loop. This is a strategic adaptation loop. Those two loops have got to connect together. So where they connect is called DDS and OP, and it's a bi-directional tactical reconciliation between what I need to do strategically and what I can do operationally. And so that capacity comes into that plan. So you've got to have a plan when you size your buffers that's realistic with the terms to capacity. So that's one, that's your tactical plan. Operationally, use your prioritized share so that you don't violate your capacity of your storage tanks. Yes, sir.
You gave an example of, for example, when you calculate buffer stocks every 1 or 2 months, you hit the wall. So how does the dynamic buffer works? I mean, how frequently you suggest, and then if there is a software or how the planner buyer can handle it?
I would never calculate buffers every 1 or 2 months. My recommendation to anybody is at minimum, buffers are recalculated on a weekly basis. Ideally, buffers are recalculated daily. Why? Because I need what we call an ADU in Spanish CPD, where I say, what's my average consumption? Kinda. I can either look forward, forecast, or I can look historically and say, what did I do? Or I can say, I'm gonna look 50-50, or 80-20, or 20-80, roughly right. Okay? That ADU needs to be plus minus 40 to 50% accurate. So having an ADU of 25 is really no different than having an ADU of 40. So don't get yourself wrapped around the axle trying to figure out it, because that single number translates to a range of capability. You're going to recalculate it daily, because you're going to recalculate that ADU, because if I'm using 50-50, I do tomorrow. I had a day that dropped off, I have a day I picked up. I'm going to take that ADU, I'm going to apply it to my buffer. So that buffer is going to be adapting and adjusting over time. Okay? And every time I adjust it, doesn't mean I'm going to order. I'm going to order every day, but I'm not going to order everything every day. Okay? And so that's why I want to adjust my buffers at least weekly, ideally daily. My planning is done daily, ideally in real time. Because unlike MRP, as MRP gets closer to real time, it gets more nervous. As DDMRP gets closer to real time, it gets more stable.
Okay.
Because you've got relevant information. So you've eliminated the delay, the latency, it's called data latency, from what's going on to you recognizing it. I mean, what's the advantage of an order sitting overnight for the planner to see it in tomorrow's run? Let it run. So, and that's the key, is MRP, the closer it gets to real time, the more nervous it becomes. DDMRP, the more stable it becomes. The worst thing that you can do in DDMRP is run it once a month. Okay, so resize your buffers once a month. I was at a company that did that, almost cost 2 executives their jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Bad idea.
Okay, you have 3 color codes, which is red, yellow, and green.
Yeah, I wonder where we got that from.
No, I got it, but what if one of the work centers, by some exception, they run more than the order quantity? I have a overstock. Will that have a different color as well?
It does. If they go over top of green, it's blue. And then I would ask 5 questions. ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? Yeah, so over top of green is light blue. Below bottom of red is dark red or black. Depends on the software that you use. Which means it's what we used to call in the old days Oswald. Oh shoot, we're out. Okay, so yeah, so there's 2 other colors. It's light blue, which is OTOG, over top of green, and below bottom of red is Oswald. Oh shoot, we're out. But the question I would ask is, why are you building a batch size that's bigger than what the buffer was sized for? Because when we calculate the 3 zones of the they'll say, I can only build it once a month. So the green zone's got to be at least a month's worth. Or minimum order quantity. So I would be por qué, por qué, por qué.
Yeah, but you have the indicator so you can make a question.
Yep. Why'd you do it? Usually when something like that shows up, it's some kind of a metric that's forcing them to do it. You got to get rid of the metrics. Stomping out those cost-based metrics are hard. Because they've been with us a long time and we love them. So efficiency, utilization, overhead absorption, out the window. Adherence to the master schedule, out the window. And we changed to flow metrics. And that's what's in this book. Small book, right? Took 3 years to write. Because we had to harmonize and align and put all the plugs in the sockets for the entire metric suite. How S&OP works, how strategic S&OP works, how tactical S&OP works. And we finally had to stick all the plugs in the sockets. And That's this. And so in here we introduced a new concept that we call ITR, inventory target ratio, because there was nothing out there that said, what's the right amount of inventory? If I have too much inventory, bad thing, too little inventory, bad thing. But what is the right amount? You know, there's people that say, the more turns I have, the better. You can have too little inventory, but turn in inventories 50 times a year and you get terrible customer service. What's the right amount of inventory that gives you maximum flow, which gives you maximum ROI? So that's why this book took 3 years. It was a pain. I was so glad to see this one go to press. But this is all the latest and greatest. This is Dick Lane. You know, and Dick read the final copy and he's like, yeah, this is what we've been talking about. Because he's always said, S&OP, Dick is very frustrated about S&OP because S&OP has deteriorated to being supply-demand balancing. Rather than what his vision was when he invented S&OP, was management's handle on the business. A lot of people credit Ollie White for the invention of S&OP. He never heard the word. Ollie died at a very young age. And Dick took over the executive class for the Ollie White organization. And there was a sales guy who was in his class. He said, I really hate this class. And Dick says, why? All you talk about is acronyms. MRP, MRP2, PAC, you know, MES. What is it that you're really talking about? And Dick said, well, we're really talking about how do you plan sales and operations. And the guy says, then, so you're really talking about sales and operations planning? He says, yeah. He says, then why don't you call it that? How it got its name. But unfortunately, when you look at everybody else and how they talk about S&OP, they try to come to a single number. Why? Because they're trying to feed the monster. They're trying to feed traditional conventional planning. It needs a single number. No. Dick and Andy Koldrick worked together and they said, we're hoping somebody will figure out the operational side. We have to be able to tie the range, the strategic range for sales and operations planning, to an operational capability range, not to a single number. Because as soon as you tie it to a single number, any connection to the range is lost. And that's what we did. There it is.
It's going to be in Frankfurt this year, in Germany. And in that event, one of the things that are, I think, the most important is the success stories that they're going to present. And there are going to be 9 success stories from different companies from all over the world. One of the stories is right here. Antonio, please stand up.
Advanced Value Stream Institute has been one of our longest partners as we've introduced demand-driven methodologies to the world. It's been one of our fastest growing partners. They've been successful in several countries around the world of implementing demand-driven and delivering really significant positive bottom return on investment to their customers. DDMRP is really just the start. It's the start of the methodology so that any company can learn how to sense and adapt. Sense the changes that are in the marketplace and adapt to this VUCA world. We're in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And the methodologies that we use today to plan and manage our supply chains were conceived in the 1950s, codified in the 60s, commercialized in the 70s, and haven't changed since. And the world around us most certainly has. So if a company is going to succeed in this VUCA world, they have to consider a different approach, being able to manage their supply chain so that they can sense those changes in the marketplace, adaptive planning and production, pull from suppliers, be able to do that all in real time so that the rate of change inside the company is equal to or faster than the rate of change in the marketplace. Really, basically, a company has only 2 choices today. They either learn how to adapt or they die.
Bueno, es una metodología que ya tenemos en la empresa. Creo que es muy relevante el tener eventos de este tipo y de esta calidad. El que esté Carol aquí, la verdad, representa el valor que tiene la comunidad regiomontana o la industria regiomontana para implementar este tipo de modelos. Creo que es súper relevante y muy contento de haber participado.
Bueno, pues me parece una muy buena oportunidad para todos para poder conocer una metodología que es diferente, que es disruptiva y que nos ayuda a todos a lo que más queremos, que es lograr un flujo, que es lo más importante en esta metodología. Y pues ¿qué aprendí? Bueno, pues reaprendí porque nosotros ya tenemos una implementación de esta metodología y pues nos reitera cómo es la importancia precisamente del flujo en la industria y cómo definitivamente la realidad nueva que tenemos nos hace necesitar herramientas de este tipo para poder seguir con los negocios prósperos.
El evento es una parte muy complementaria sobre el proceso que estamos llevando. Nos ayuda mucho a poner más claro lo que estamos viendo y nos da más confianza en el segundo paso que estamos llevando dentro del proceso de DDMRP. Nosotros ya hicimos la prueba de conceptos y tuvimos muy buenos resultados en esta prueba. Incluso se ve un beneficio de un 20 o 30% en nuestros inventarios en los productos que está en la prueba. En comparación a los modelos anteriores, pues es que con la volatilidad que tenemos en estos momentos, es imposible llevar aquellos métodos. Tenemos un método que nos está ayudando a ver el futuro y mejorar el servicio al cliente.